Welcome to the Felis Project podcast. I'm your host, Dominique Hoffman, and this week I speak with our director, Luke Moon, to discuss what reconciliation post-conflict looks like in a no-trust environment. With the Israel-Hamas war continuing on, many are looking to what will happen after the end to this immediate conflict. Will reconciliation be possible for Israelis and Palestinians? What is the hope of reconciliation? Self-determination for a Palestinian state, and for Israel to secure peace and security. But these questions have plagued this conflict long before October 7th and have failed since long before 1948 when Israel was recognized as a state. Since the fall of the Ottoman Empire, reconciliation initiatives have failed between Arab Palestinians and Jewish Palestinians, now Israelis. Luke walks our audience through the essential components needed for reconciliation. From a biblical and Christian perspective, this is outlined in Psalms 85:10, which highlights mercy, truth, righteousness, and peace as the essential pillars for reconciliation. This conversation is insightful and is also a call to action for Christians as we continue our work here at the Felis Project in reconciling with our Jewish neighbors. I hope you enjoy. Welcome back to the Felis Project podcast. Luke Moon, our director here at the Felis Project. How are you?
I'm well. It's good to be back.
I'm excited to have you talk about your recent trip to Madrid, Spain, where you held a talk on reconciliation in a no-trust environment, specifically looking at the Israel-Hamas war. Maybe you could provide our audience some context as to what that talk was about.
Yeah, I was invited to a think tank conversation. It was on reconciliation and conflict was one of the main themes. And so I was asked to provide a paper on my thoughts on the issue of reconciliation in a conflict or post-conflict zone, and really focusing on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict specifically, and what it's like. How do you do reconciliation in a no trust environment? Because that's where things are at right now.
And what are some of the conditions, just broadly speaking, in any conflict or post-conflict area needed for like reconciliation and rebuilding trust?
Well, I think first of all, I think it's important that, perhaps I explain why there's no trust, because it's, before October 7th and the Hamas invasion of Israel, I would say it was a low trust environment, meaning that, like, there were people that were working together, particularly like actually the people who lived in the kibbutzes nearest to Gaza. That's where the peaceniks lived. There was like the pro peace, the biggest like activist class of peace people were in the Gaza envelope. And one woman, she had a peace wall. Where groups would go, like our groups that we would take would actually go to this place. You would take a piece of tile and you would participate in putting your tile on the peace wall. It was making a mosaic. There was a woman who flew a kite every Shabbat that had, words of affirmation and peace on them. The mayor of Kibbutz Aza or Kfar Aza was planning to do a industrial zone where, Gazan workers and Israelis would work side by side. And also, these were not like European Jews either. They were the people who lived in the Gaza envelope were formerly, like, there were former refugees from the Arab world that got their parents or grandparents or whoever had gotten kicked out of places like Iraq and Morocco and Egypt and Libya, etc. And that was the group that was the victims of October 7th. And one of the things that created the no trust environment was the fact that the first people to breach the wall, they had, they are basically the Hamas special forces, if you will. They had maps of each of the kibbutzes where all of the important people lived, where the security officer lived, where the mayor lived, where, like, the important people in town. and they went there first and executed those people. And then, said, once they took out all the security apparatus, then they, like, the next wave of people just came in and brutalized the places, right? But it was the fact that they had the maps, right? Like, one story in particular I found very interesting was that there was a woman in, I think, Kfar that she was religious, and everybody else, or most of the other people in the kibbutz were not practicing religious Jews. And so she was normally not there for Shabbat. She would go to another kibbutz nearby, and she would then go to synagogue and do all the religious stuff. But she was sick that day. And so she's in her house, in her safe room. They never came to her door because they knew she was not, they knew she wasn't supposed to be there. And so they didn't bother. That's the level of detail. And so if you're imagining every day hundreds of thousands of Palestinians crossing from, the West Bank or Judean Samaria towns of Ramallah and Bethlehem, etc., crossing the border and going to work at the hotels and be maids and housekeepers and landscapers and do all the construction for the country and, like, even professional jobs, etc., they would come across and do that stuff. So if that was the expectation, that these few who crossed over from Gaza set up this maps on who to kill first, imagine what 200,000 or 300,000 other people could do if they had maps too. And so you shatter the trust. Like, it just is utterly destroyed.
Mm-hmm. When our most recent PLI trip was in the Gaza envelope in Israel, we went to the border and Kfar, and you could just feel the betrayal as they're walking us through. These are people who, like you said, worked at their houses. They knew exactly where everyone lived. There was maps drawn out where everybody lived. And so this was just a deep betrayal of people who were supposed to be their neighbors. And I think it's really important to emphasize, as you did, that these kibbutzim are largely made up of kind of more socialist thinking, left-leaning, hippie, peace activist.
There's a lot of weed smoked. A lot of weed.
Yeah. A lot of just honestly, like modern day kind of hippies. And one lady, Vivian Silver, I believe was her name, was a very influential Palestinian peace activist who was killed on October 7th. And so I think it highlights that this ideology is not interested in a peaceful resolution. And there is that personal betrayal of coming in and identifying people who or have interacted with for their systematic killing. So that really shatters, as you pointed out, any condition for trust. Can we maybe back up and zoom out? What were some reconciliation projects, or where was the talks for pluralism before October 7th? I know you identified it was already a low trust environment, but what did that look like?
Well, I mean, there was lots of organizations that were working on this issue. Like there's one called Roots Shurshim, which was let's get Israeli settlers and Palestinians together in the same room. There was, the mayor of Efrat invited, Palestinians over to celebrate, a holiday. Like it was like an ongoing kind of, like there was people who were anti what was called normalization, which is like you shouldn't hang out at all with any Jews. That's the anti-normalization crowd, right? But there was a lot of people who were like, no, like listen, we're going to have to live together. It's not, we want our kids to be safe. That's what we're after. So let's figure out how we make this work. And so that's, at the base level, one of the important aspects of a reconciliation is there has to be peace, and meaning like it doesn't have to be like perfect peace or perpetual peace in like Kantian form. It just needs to be like, we're not killing each other right now. And I do think there was a big difference between, like, one of the reasons why, Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, and Gaza have been different as a result of the war, is because one side in Gaza, there was no interaction at all. Zero. It's like walled off, like no interaction. Whereas in the West Bank, everybody's kind of mixed up a bit, and everybody's packing also. So, it's a suicide mission if you're going to try and pull something off. And there just aren't that many people who actually want to commit suicide. There's a lot of people talk about wanting to commit suicide, but actually people who don't, there's a lot of that. And so it was, I think, one of the things that there's just so much interaction, which is a really important requirement for there to be kind of reconciliation. Now, one of the challenges for reconciliation is that it's very much actually a Christian concept, and it's rooted largely in things like, forgiving one another. And a lot of the reconciliation work that's done around the world is geared towards stepping in the place of as a representative, in a sense, of your people, and asking forgiveness for what they have done, like historically, kind of thing. I mean, that's a big kind of, it's the kind of thing where you have, I don't know, like you have national movements, like, when Australia apologized to the Aborigines, like that kind of thing. That's a national apology, a national reconciliation kind of initiative. Like South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after apartheid. You had some stuff in Rwanda also, in Northern Ireland. Some of these big places where these, has been pretty significant conflict, between peoples, tribes, whatever. You have these kind of reconciliation movements, and what is required is kind of a like forgiveness, right? But forgiveness is not the strongest theme in Islam, or and I'll probably get flack for this, but I'll take it, no problem. In Judaism either, you don't see it a ton. And I've raised this issue to a bunch of Jews, and they agree. And so it makes it a little more difficult to push this along in that kind of environment. But it's still like that. The interaction piece is so important. Because you got to mix people up in order for there to be anything positive come out of it.
Wow. I really love that you highlighted that forgiveness and the idea of reconciliation is a Christian principle. Because if we look at past, genocides or ethno-religious conflicts, you mentioned Rwanda. Rwanda is like one of the only examples of a rehabilitated society that's completely reconciled between the Hutsis and the Tutsis, but they shared Christianity. So it was an ethnic conflict. Whereas we look at the Balkans, and the Balkan states never really reconciled. They just coexist, which is probably something we could hope for in, the Israel-Palestinian context, is the environment of coexistence. So that is a very interesting point that you raised.
Yeah, it is really important, and it's because it is actually it's in the New Testament, right? Like, we are reconciled to God first, and therefore, once that reconciliation happens vertically, then it can happen horizontally, right? Like, that's kind of the framing. But it also, like, you did see like other places where you've had some really real progress, or like potentials for war that ended up not happening. South Africa is a great example, right? The Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that were formed to basically deal with that, like the issue of brutality. And there's a verse that was used to undergird the reconciliation. This is used by reconciliation practitioners, particularly Christian ones, all over the place, and it's Psalm 85:10. And and I can read it from. I'm going to do the New King James because I think it has the word I want, which is it says, "Mercy and truth have met together; righteousness and peace have kissed." And so they use this like there's four things that have to come together in order for there to be reconciliation: mercy, truth, righteousness, and peace. And if you have all four of those components, then you're going to have reconciliation. If you don't have all four, you're not. And so, when looking at and in the NIV it uses the word love. I think ESV uses that for steadfast kindness or something like that. But I like the word mercy. I think mercy is really important because mercy it depends a lot on justice, right? So like you don't get like mercy is useless if there's never justice. And so the expectation is that there's justice is being meted out. It's being pushed. And to extend then mercy is is an act of significant grace, right? So we all, in the Christian context, I would say we all deserve total judgment and eternity in hell. But in God's mercy, we are allowed to be reconciled to him, right? Like like the justice is clear, and so the mercy matters. Basically the quality of mercy is dependent upon the quality of justice. And so when that first word is mercy, it means that you could say, I deserve to have punishment meted out against you who offended me and wronged me, and you murdered my family, and you deserve to die. But out of mercy, I will forgive you. Like it comes from a place of we recognize what justice would look like, and yet we're going to choose to act differently than that. And it's so that's at the core a feature of reconciliation. Yeah.
And I think what stuck out to me is the word righteousness. And I think one of the fault lines in this conflict is that righteousness looks different for both sides of this conflict. And maybe you can speak to, because we even talked about attempts to reconciliation before October 7th. Why did that fall void on a lot of the Palestinians in Gaza? What is that kind of ideological motivation to reject any peace or reconciliation?
Well, right. I just don't think, in Islam, justice is such a strong feature of Islam. It's like never forget kind of thing. I remember standing in Srebrenica, which is in the Balkans, and it's the site of where there's a bunch of refugees who are fleeing the war between I think the Bosnians and the Serbs. I think that was the two sides, if you will. Yeah, and who are Muslim, and the Serbs who were Orthodox Christian, and the Serbs had set up on this like long road, basically their machine guns, and the peacekeepers, the UN peacekeepers, were supposed to be protecting the refugees as they were trying to, as they were fleeing from one place to another. And they, the Serbs basically set up on this road, and just anybody who crossed the road just mowed them down. Just hundreds of people were murdered in that instance. It was actually one of the, major reasons why that the U.S. got actually involved in that conflict, because of Srebrenica. And the monument in Srebrenica was only about justice. Needing, we will get justice. We will get justice for this. And it was very clear that what was missing was any kind of words of forgiveness, right? Like, and it, listen, if you don't have the word, if you don't have the concept, then there's nothing there. But yeah, righteous. But the thing is that um, it isn't. We're not relativists when it comes to righteousness. Actually, I don't. Well, we shouldn't be, at least if we're Christians. We shouldn't be. It means that like we do actually believe there is a right and a wrong, and it's not up to, it's this idea of there being a higher law, right? There's a law that is, to quote, I think Cicero, right? There's a law above Rome and Athens. It's God's law. And so the appeal to something higher is the appeal, like that's where the righteousness is directed. It's not just, you got your truth, I got my truth, and we're gonna we got our truths, right? Like, no, there is a righteousness. But it's also, it means that when it comes to it, like so much of this has to do with the cessation. I mean, you have to have the peace, so you're not shooting at each other still, right? It's one of the, right now we're not in a moment where we can even have reconciliation because like the shooting's still happening. Okay, and you need that to stop for any kind of reconciliation to move forward.
You mentioned too that the West Bank looks vastly different, although there are still vast hostilities, than Gaza looks. So after the end of this war, what do you think the next phase of Gaza should look like to help usher in the next step towards reconciliation? Would it be reintegrating, both Jews and Muslims together, or is it almost like an enigma of a puzzle of what to do with Gaza?
The challenge is that you do have this, like it's going to take a bit. One of the in my talk in Spain, the angle that I went with was like, what do you learn from marriage counselors when it comes to, how do you get, how is there reconciliation in a marriage where there has been some kind of breaking of trust? And what I was actually went further, like, and there has been violence. So it's not only was there, let's say there was infidelity, but it's infidelity with violence. And like, what do you do in that instance? And so when I talked with secular, marriage counselors and psychologists and people, it, like, consistently, everyone I spoke to said, you got to recommend divorce. That's the only outcome. You just got, like, it's divorce. The marriage is done. And the Christians, we're always a sucker for no, it can be reconciled, right? So they had other options, but it was those options were put a lot on the offender. Okay. And so there were 4 characteristics that had to be included in how do you reconcile a marriage after there's been a breaking of trust with violence. And the first thing that had to do was the offender had to be willing to take responsibility for his or her actions without blame on something else or somebody else. So it had to be, it couldn't be just, but the serpent made me do it, right? Like you had to own it. Like, this is, no, like, I did this and I was wrong. Like, it's a will, you have to, like, it had to be an ownership. And then you had to have like a plan in order for there not to be future opportunities for, further infidelity or infidelity with violence, right? You had to, like, what is the plan that's going to keep you from doing this again? And then there had to be an agreement to seek counseling. You had to, like, both, like, and then the third thing, and I think probably the most important, is time. There had to be, like, you just had to accept this is going to take a long time to overcome distrust. And so I think, that's we're in the time stage right now, because again, we're not even at the point where there's been a cessation of violence. And so we have to accept that this is going to be a long, if there's ever going to be reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians, it's going to take a long time. I'm not particularly optimistic. I don't think it's a realistic opportunity. Actually, I'm a pessimist on this point, because I think that there's like culturally very distinct, and there's I don't think there's a willingness to go through these steps. Actually, problem is they're stuck together, right? Unless one group leaves, then we're in this. We're gonna have to make something work, right? But it's not gonna be immediate, so it's gonna take time. But it's that willingness to. I mean, how many reports have you heard, Dominique, where it's been like, yeah, October 7th was terrible, but it was because of 75 years of Israeli brutality and blah, blah, blah. That is a proper, blame shifting, right? Like, I have a rule: everything before the but is BS. And that applies. Yeah. October 7th was terrible, but yeah, okay. You don't actually think it was that terrible, because you're justifying it based upon what, you're saying that Israel's to blame, actually, because of 75 years.
Yeah, on the Palestinian experience, or even just a skewing of, Gaza as an open air prison of 70 years. It's like, well, God, they haven't even autonomously ruled Gaza for 70.
It's apartheid, it's genocide, it's, settler colonialism, it's white supremacy, it's, whatever, it's, the list goes on, right? But it's the same, but we're not, I mean, you're not there. Like, and there's also, there's, I mean, the Hamas in particular has said, we're not, like, we want this to happen all over the world. This is, October 7th was the template. It was the model for global, global more.
You talked about it needing time and not going in depth to what all the different peace processes have looked like, but what have been some of the historic sticking points between the Palestinian perspective and the Israeli perspective over the conflict? Like, even before 1948, I know the Arabs largely rejected any sort of partition plan. So what have those fault lines been? And obviously time hasn't solved those contentions between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Yeah. I mean, like, here's reality is that the powers, we call them the powers, which means like everybody outside of Israeli Palestinians, right? The Americans, the Brits, the Russians, the Chinese, like everybody around has been trying to get this people to like get along for a long time. We're talking like, once basically the Ottoman Empire fell at the end of World War I, it's been attempt after attempt after attempt. So we're talking more than 100 years. Here we are, 2024, and it became, the British were like, they picked up the mantle of responsibility for the region after the Ottoman Empire fell, and they're like, we can't figure this out. And then, they kicked it to the UN. The UN's like, commission and this idea, and we'll do these, and we'll have, no, it's like, and, every president of the United States has been like, I got this. And then they crash upon the shoals. And it's not any different with the current president or the last one or the next one. It's like it. Well, maybe I'm too pessimistic on that. Maybe the next one will do it. I don't know. But here's the thing: is that you just have so much differences. Like in the conflicts, particularly like, let's say Northern Ireland, Rwanda, South Africa, the Balkans. I think there's a lot more tools to work with. Perhaps the Balkans is the hardest of those. Um, but there was a lot of raw material, and I think you don't really have as much raw material to work with the Israelis, Palestinians, because the Palestinians and the Arabs in general are a shame and honor culture, and the Israelis are a guilt and redemption culture, right? Like those two, like how you even view the world is fundamentally different. And so much of what looks like political division is actually cultural divisions. There's a lot of that stuff. Um, as the primary Israeli society shifts from being primarily Ashkenazi, which is like European and whatever, to either like proper Mizrahi, the Middle Eastern born, Middle Eastern oriented, whatever. Like even the Israeli society is gonna shift and is shifting. And it's some days, Dominique, I wonder to myself, 500 years, a book of the Bible was written about the Israeli Philistine conflicts of the 2000s. Is that what we're up against? Because I kind of think it sure feels that way, right? Because like you read the book Kings or Chronicles, and it covers like and this king reigned for 35 years, and it's like he gets a sentence. I mean, not a single president of the United States has been in charge that long, and like the Queen of England, she was along, but like it's like we live in these moments where we're like we're living at the center of the universe, in the center of all time, and when you gotta zoom out and go like we're not that, and we actually haven't changed that much. It was like it sure feels like a Israel-Philistine fight to me, but maybe that's too biblically looking at things or reading it through. I don't know.
No, but I do agree. It's when you step back, because even the word Palestine or Palestinian was really the Roman Empire's middle finger to Israel, naming it Syria, Palestina, after their two greatest biblical enemies, the Assyrians and the Philistines. And it's a fight that continues today. So it is of biblical proportion. With the international community's pressure, and I know this past week, a lot of European countries just unilaterally acknowledged the state of Palestine. In what ways does this international pressure against Israel really hurt any likelihood or outcome for peace? Because I know a lot of these European nations might be doing it in the name of peace, but how does it actually discourage lasting peace in the long run?
Well, first of all, I think we got to put that in perspective. Yeah, three countries, claim, said they were gonna recognize, the state of Palestine. Actually, the majority of countries in the United Nations recognize the state of Palestine. It's distinctive, perhaps, that Spain and I think Norway did. I'm not so at all surprised that the Irish also joined in that. The Irish have a long-term beef with Israel. I think they see Israel as an extension of Britain, and they hate Britain, and so therefore, we'll hate Israel too. It's psychological in that direction. But here's the thing. Just practically speaking, let's say that as a result of all of the anti-Semitism against Jews in Europe, France, England, the UK, all of those people go to Israel. And in the United States, a bunch of people who are living in Teaneck or LA, they go to Israel. Let's say that 1 million people from around the world go to Israel. Where are they going to live? Where are they going to live? Somebody tell me where they're going to live. They're going to live, what, Tel Aviv? I'm sorry, no. Tel Aviv's not, like, you can build apartment complexes from Haifa all the way down to Ashkelon, and it's going to be rough to get a another million people in there. So what is happening? Here's where I'll lay this out to you, Dominique. I'll be the realist in the room. Okay, is that at some point, just because of necessity, Israel is going to annex what they call Judea and Samaria, which is actually the biblical homeland. And so the question isn't whether there's going to be a 2-state or 1-state, like how many states, whatever. The real question everybody should be asking is, what's the best mechanism to give Palestinians self-determination and allow Israel to be safe? That's what the question's all about. That's where the real conversation takes place. And so you have a bunch of different models. I mean, I've looked, early on when I started doing this stuff, I dug up 22 different solutions for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. 22. There was, like the Rand Corp. I know everybody's so familiar with Rand Corp, but there was like Rand Corp had this thing called the ARC plan, which basically was a train monorail type thing that went from Gaza and arced through Israel. Because all of the major Palestinian towns are in the spine of the mountains in Israel, and then you had Gaza. So you had to create this arc. It was an idea. Somebody, some super smart people got in a room together and be like, all right, what's the plan? How do we solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And their thing was like, well, you just connect Gaza to the West Bank and the Palestinian towns, and I don't know, do whatever, and that would be the solution. Like, I don't know. I'm like, you lose me once you get to like, well, what's the plan? Once you get, I don't know. But what I do know is that like that is, just by sheer numbers of people and the people being driven from countries around the world, and they're not coming to America because America won't give them citizenship, but Israel will. So they can go to Israel. I mean, there's like 50,000 Jews left in Denmark. 50,000. It's not a huge number. Okay. Before October 7th, the largest number of immigrants into Israel were French, right? Because they're seeing like, a woman gets beaten and murdered in her apartment by Islamists, and the guy gets let go. How many people ended up making Aliyah, going to Israel because of that? Lots. That's the reality. So I'm all down for the conversation about how to give Palestinians self-determination and for Israelis to have safety and security. I don't think there's any realistic person thinks that there's going to be a 2-state here in the future. I don't think that's real.
Yeah, I want to, as we close, just highlight the fact that responsibility plays a huge role in that process. And I think we've seen the international community excuse Hamas, allow them to not take responsibility and to really shift blame back on Israel. And I think if that cycle continues, as you point out, from a very realistic perspective, peace is hard to obtain, or if it is obtained, it's for brief periods of time. And you have something like October 7th happen. And also, I think.
But you have lots of examples where there was like major violence, and then there's like friendship, kind of. I mean, like the U.S. and Japan, and the U.S. and Germany. We really wrecked them, but then we're friends now, and everybody wants to go to Japan or Germany, right? It's cool. So it's possible.
Mm-hmm. It is. And I'm excited to be part of the Felis project because we get to kind of straddle that call to action for Christians. I guess my closing statement, Luke, for you would be, what role does Felis play in this, and what should Christians in the West be either praying for at the very least, or in their activism, what should they be advocating for?
Well, I would say it's twofold. One is when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we are outsiders, outside observers, and can encourage and promote and like, listen, you guys are like, you might want to divorce, but you get divorced, but you're still stuck in the same house. So how are you gonna make this work? How are you gonna clean the dishes, right? Like that's the reality. At the same time, I would say that there's a couple thousand years worth of Christian anti-Semitism, Christian Jew hatred that we actually can stand in the place of, because our ancestors tried to force Jews to eat pork as a, like, just to be jerks about it. Okay, like that's our past. And so there's kind of two reconciliations. One is I can be like a promoter of peace between Palestinians and Jews or Israelis, and at the same time, and this is the thing I can do now while I'm waiting for the time thing horizon to be extended, I can actually be an agent of reconciliation between Christians and Jews, because that is a deep distrust, and we have not earned very much favor. It's growing, but we don't have. I mean, we have 2,000 years to overcome, and that distrust is very deep. And so that I can do right now, and that at the Felis Project we can do right this second. There's all kinds of things that you can do to reach out to your Jewish friend or neighbor or local synagogue or whatever, and just say, "Hey, listen, I support you. I'm here for you. I sorry for what my ancestors did, but I'm trying to be not like them. I'm trying to not revive the sad history of Christian anti-Semitism." And so I think that's where I find a lot that can be done, and a lot that we can do at the Felis Project, while at the same time we can be encouraging the Israelis and Palestinians to find a way to live together.
I love what you said. It starts local, and it starts with that responsibility on our part as Christians for that reconciliation front. Um, and that's needed more now than ever, especially after the rise of anti-Semitism across the United States. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Luke, do you have any projects you want to share with our audience?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, follow the Feelers Project, subscribe to all the stuffs. We have so much going on an ongoing basis. We have all these various projects and programs: Feels Latino and Feels Black, Feels Catholic, the Charles Malik Institute. We're soon to be. We just launched recently. We have a fellow, Farhad. He is a convert to Christianity from Islam in Iran. So he's speaking regularly about the problem of Iran in the region, and their treatment of Christians and other religious minorities. And then we're soon to launch the Generation Zion, which is there'll be lots more coming on that soon. And so it's lots is going on here. The Feels Project is all very exciting, and you just got to stay tuned for more, because more is coming.
And I'll take the time to shamelessly plug my project here at the Felis Project. We have the Pathfinder Retreat. It will be in Washington, D.C. from June 27th to the 29th. It is a fully funded, subsidized opportunity for young Christian leaders. You can head over to Pathfinder on the Felis Project website to find out more for how to qualify for that retreat. And that leads to our Felis Leadership Institute trip, which I talk about a lot here on the podcast, which is another fully subsidized trip on the ground in Israel that Luke joins us for. So you could come on a trip with me and Luke. Thank you so much, Luke.
It's amazing.
It is amazing. It's my favorite project. Thank you, Luke, and I will see everyone next week.
Thank you.